Now, on the federal advocacy front, starting with our advocacy agenda, MCUL's annual Hike the Hill, dubbed as Hike at Home for 2020 due to the virtual nature of this year's event, kicked off on October 5th and concluded on October 15th. Participation in this year's hike was up significantly from prior years, with about 80 credit union leaders engaged and participating. Typically, our in-person hikes on Capitol Hill usually garner around 45 to 50, so we appreciate that increase in engagement and participation. We're pleased by the increased interest in all of these events, and we work to ensure that new participants stay engaged and have a meaningful experience as we participate in this important grassroots lobbying effort. Credit union leaders met with all but one of our congressional delegation, rather. Congressman Justin Amash, who's not seeking re-election, was not available to meet with us. We also met with our two U.S. Senators, Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow. Our advocates discussed pressing legislative priorities such as PPP forgiveness legislation, the creation of a housing assistance fund and stimulus legislation, increased CDFI funding, with all of these officers, along with other priorities that we've been talking about for some time, like preserving our tax-exempt status, having some data security legislation get passed at the federal level, updates to our Federal Credit Union Act, and cannabis banking. In addition to these meetings with our congressional delegation, we also met with NCUA Chairman Rodney Hood on October 7th. Our advocates discussed the examination environment and net worth concerns, share insurance fund issues, and some specific issues caused by COVID-19 related deposit growth. Chairman Hood was joined by our NCUA Eastern Regional Director, John Cutchie. Now, the 2020 hike was a success as credit union advocates were able to educate and inform federal policymakers and their legislative staff on all of these key issues. We received a number of commitments from members of the delegation to co-sponsor legislation that's important to our movement, both in the current Congress and in 2021 when the new Congress is seated. Before I turn to the state advocacy side, I did want to mention briefly that as I record this, Congress and the White House are continuing to discuss important Phase 4 stimulus legislation. Nothing is certain at the moment, but we'll continue to monitor that progress, as obviously it has become very partisan and politically charged with just 3 weeks before the election. Now, on the state advocacy side, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled in favor of the legislature and held that the governor did not have the ability under the 1976 Emergency Management Act and the 1945 Emergency Powers of Governor Act to continue to implement and execute those executive orders following the legislature's refusal to extend the state of emergency and the state of disaster orders on April 30th. This means that all of the executive orders issued from April 30th until the present day are unenforceable. The Supreme Court also held that this finding by the court is effective immediately. Now, DIFS has issued a bulletin on this matter as well, and the legislature returned to work with the governor to put in place certain protocols for COVID-19. The issues addressed during their return pertain to nursing home measures, unemployment insurance, e-notary and remote notary, and COVID employer liability legislation. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, as you probably know by now, has issued emergency orders, as has MIOSHA, under their authority, which basically reinstate much of what was in the governor's executive orders pertaining to the wearing of masks and social distancing and limitations on the size of gatherings in the public domain. For the summary and full text of the emergency orders and the DIFS bulletin and recent happenings, please visit our website or reach out to one of our team members. Now, on the legislative front, our team is continuing to push the legislature to enact common sense data breach notification legislation with Congress and in Lansing. And with that being said, the legislation was given an initial hearing in the Senate Regulatory Reform Committee. and met with a new point of opposition from the retail and manufacturing sectors as it relates to a financial institution exemption to the legislation. Our team is meeting with members of the committee and members of the Senate to explain why that exemption is in place. A second hearing on the legislation is expected following the November election. The team, along with a coalition of over 40 other trade associations and business groups, was able to further legislative actions aimed at protecting employers, including credit unions, from liability issues associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a huge development, and I appreciate our team's efforts in collaboration with those groups. Legislation in Michigan was passed and is expected to be signed by the governor, which would grant immunity to businesses from liabilities for a contraction of COVID-19 if businesses complied with all federal, state, and local requirements and standards. This legislation is retroactive, so businesses would be covered from March 1st, 2020, moving forward. Also included in the legislation is a provision in the event that there is a de minimis deviation from strict compliance with the previously mentioned guidance, which would still afford the employer some protections. The legislation is, as I said, a great step toward protecting businesses in the state of Michigan, including credit unions, and we're thankful to have been a part of that collaborative effort with the legislature. Finally, legislation addressing criminal justice reform specific to expunction was signed by the governor, Public Act 187 to 193 of 2020. The bipartisan package addresses when low-level crimes should be automatically expunged as long as a number of factors are met. Our team worked with others in the business community to ensure that crimes that were eligible for this new automatic expunction were not ones of dishonesty, financial crimes, or moral character. The legislation also has safeguards built in for employers, and we're very thankful to have had a part in shaping that important legislation as well. On the appropriations front, we were successful in getting both of our budget requests included in the fiscal year 21 budget. $600,000 for e-recording funding was included, as well as $1 million for the Michigan Saves program. Both were included in the budget. And our team is proud of the efforts that were undertaken to accomplish these important appropriation priorities. Now, shifting to the regulatory compliance side, our team is preparing our regulatory advocacy agenda and regulatory priorities for next year. We will be assisted by our state and federal issues committees, Government and Political Affairs Forum, on determining those priorities and making sure that we're focused on the right things for our membership. We've also been working in conjunction with Strategic Advisory Solutions to provide top-notch compliance resources to Michigan credit unions, as well as to determine what helpline issues may be addressed via legislative action. A video outlining how and where to find compliance resources from the League has been produced and will be available shortly to assist credit unions in more easily finding answers to those complex compliance questions. During our Hike at Home event, we had the pleasure of meeting with NCWA Board Chairman Rodney Hood. He was able to touch base with credit unions on a number of topics of importance and answered some really key questions during that dialogue. Chairman Hood is always great about preparing for our issues and engaging with our credit union community. He addressed ongoing COVID-19 crisis issues, including capitalizing interest on mortgage loans, the delay of the risk-based capital rule, and executive orders to reduce regulatory burdens. He also touched on virtual examinations and share insurance fund issues and subordinated debt, among other topics. Our team and the Compliance Network is working on a meeting pertaining to the implementation of ELT with the Secretary of State and DIFS. This meeting will take place in the fourth quarter of this year. More details on this will be sent out to our credit unions very soon. We'll have more to share on these virtual meetings in the near future. And as always, you can find detailed information on these legislative and regulatory issues on our website. And we also invite you to reach out to one of our team members as well.